The microphone squealed, feedback jarring the Elmwood Inn ballroom. Dr. Silas Thorne, chief of medicine, pointed a shaky finger at my wife, Sarah. Our new deputy head of cardiology, he slurred, knows a thing or two about late-night consultations. Sarah's champagne glass tilted, spilling amber liquid onto her silk dress, her face draining to bone white. Silas smirked, a predator's grin. A ripple of nervous coughs moved through the ballroom, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Every one of the 300 faces at the Oak Haven General Charity Gala had turned, not to Silas Thorne swaying slightly by the podium, but to Sarah. My wife, the newly minted deputy head of cardiology, sat frozen. The spilled champagne on her iridescent blue dress seemed to spread, a darkening stain over the elegant fabric. Her jaw was tight. She wasn't looking at Silas. She was staring straight ahead, past the linen tablecloths and the glimmer of candlelight, as if seeking an exit that wasn't there. My own hands, resting on my knees beneath the table, clenched into fists, the knuckles white and aching. 8 years. That's how long it had been since I first saw Sarah, then a fresh resident in the emergency room. A Monday morning, hot and humid, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and stale coffee. Mr. Schmidt, a retiree from out on Route 51, had come in with a massive MI. Code blue. Chaos. But Sarah moved through it all with a quiet precision, her eyes fixed, her voice calm as she issued orders. Epinephrine, 2 mics, crash cart. She looked up once, caught my gaze for a fleeting second as I prepped the defib paddles. There was a strength in her then, an intensity that drew you in. She saved Mr. Schmidt that day. I knew it. Everyone in that ER knew it. We had built a good life since then. 6 years married, mostly quiet, content. My shifts as a paramedic were long, her hospital hours even longer. We'd meet in the kitchen late at night, sometimes just for a minute, sharing a look before we both collapsed. Weekends were for the small things, a walk by the river, grocery shopping, talking about the cases that had stuck with us. Sarah loved her work. She lived for it, for Oak Haven General, for the next patient. I took immense pride in her dedication, in the steady climb of her career. The promotion, deputy head, was a testament to years of 18-hour days and missed holidays. Silas Thorne, the chief of medicine, had always been a fixture at the hospital, a man whose charm was as calculating as his movements. He had a way of making people feel seen, heard, and then subtly indebted. His status was untouchable, built on years of service, grant money, and a network of contacts that spread across the state. I'd watched him work a room, a master of backslapping and inside jokes, his laugh booming a little too loud sometimes. For a while, Silas had seemed to take a particular interest in Sarah's career. He'd recommend her for specialized training, put her name forward for committee work. It all seemed above board, a mentor guiding a promising talent. Sarah always focused on the next challenge, absorbed it all, working harder, proving herself. We'd talked about it, her excitement for the opportunities. I'd seen nothing amiss. This gala, the annual charity event for Oak Haven General, was supposed to be her triumph, her official introduction. I had a bottle of good bourbon chilling at home, a quiet celebration planned for when we got back. Instead, it had morphed, in the space of one drunken slur, into something akin to a public execution. We had arrived a little late, as usual. Sarah had been held up with a patient in recovery, a new post-op concern. Nothing serious, she'd assured me, just required her specific attention. The Elmwood Inn ballroom was already buzzing, a polished hum of conversation and clinking glasses. We navigated the crowd, shaking hands, accepting the quiet congratulations offered to Sarah. Linda Hansen, head of neurology, had pulled Sarah into a brief, genuine hug, wishing her well. For a few minutes, the air had felt normal, festive. Then Silas, having worked his way around the room, a perfect host with a slightly too red face, had spotted us. His movements were deliberate as he walked over to our table, microphone in hand. "Mr. Jenkins," he'd boomed, his voice echoing, "the woman of the hour." He raised his glass and then, with a twisted smile, he delivered the devastating blow. The applause that should have followed Silas Thorne's announcement never came. Instead, the ballroom became a hive of hushed whispers, a collective intake of breath. Heads swiveled. Eyes, hundreds of them, darted between Silas, still swaying slightly by the podium, and Sarah, who sat as if she'd been carved from ice. My hand instinctively reached for her arm, my grip tight on the soft silk. A whirlwind of emotions churned inside me. Protective anger, cold confusion, and a sickening dread that coiled in my gut. What was that? What had he meant? Sarah flinched at my touch, her body stiff. Her eyes were wide, not with anger, but with a raw, animal panic I had never seen before. She tugged her arm free, a sudden violent movement, and pushed back from the table. The chair scraped loudly on the polished floor, a harsh sound in the sudden quiet of the room. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. Her gaze was fixed on the double doors at the far end of the ballroom, and she stumbled towards them, a desperate need for escape propelling her forward. I stood, my own chair falling back with a thud, and followed her. Each step felt heavy, like walking through thick mud. The pride I'd felt for her, the solid belief in the life we'd built, was crumbling around me, leaving sharp, uneven edges. The festive evening, so carefully planned, so full of promise, had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, glinting under the indifferent ballroom lights. I could feel the stares on my back, a silent jury. The automatic doors of the Elmwood Inn hissed open and then shut behind us, cutting off the last of the distant murmurs. The parking lot was a dark expanse, slick with a fine, persistent rain. The air was cold, damp. We walked to my truck, the only sound the muffled crunch of our shoes on the gravel. I opened the passenger door for her. She slid in, her movements stiff, unnatural. The silence in the truck was a living thing, heavier than the rain drumming on the roof. I started the engine. The wipers scraped rhythmically across the windshield, pushing away the water that blurred the streetlights. My throat felt tight, raw. "Sarah," I tried, the word a rasp. What was that?" The question felt rough and unwanted, a stone lodged in my mouth. I wanted to look at her, to understand, but she was staring straight ahead, her profile rigid. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I could see the wet trails on her cheeks, silent tears streaming down her face, refusing to meet my gaze. I drove the familiar route home to our quiet Oakhaven Street. The rain picked up, blurring the houses and the wet sheen of the asphalt. Our house, a comfortable two-story with a porch light always left on, felt suddenly cold and foreign, a place I barely recognized. We walked through the front door, the click of the lock echoing in the stillness. "Sarah," my voice was rougher now, betraying the controlled pain that had begun to spread through my chest. I shut the door and turned to face her. "What did he mean? You need to tell me." She didn't answer right away. Her elegant gown, now stained with champagne, seemed to weigh her down. She moved towards the living room couch, her knees giving out, and she collapsed onto it. Her shoulders began to shake, a small, violent tremor. She buried her face in her hands, her hair falling across her face. "He made me," she whispered, the words muffled and broken. He threatened my career, my life's work." My mind raced, trying to piece it all together. Silas Thorne's strange, almost possessive attention to her over the years. The special assignments, the sudden promotions, the way he would sometimes linger near her office door. It had all seemed like professional mentorship, a powerful man taking a protege under his wing. Now it twisted into something else, something ugly. I saw the raw terror in her eyes, the deep humiliation etched on her face. But my own heart was an icy knot, tightening with a bitter taste of betrayal. "How long?" The question ripped through the fragile quiet of our home, sharp and unavoidable. Sarah's hands dropped from her face, revealing eyes swollen and red. She met my gaze for a split second, then looked away as if unable to bear the weight of it. "For the last year," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "He cornered me, used his power." A whole year, the words settled in my gut like a lead weight, a physical punch. For a year, while I was out on calls, while I slept beside her, while we made small talk over breakfast, this had been happening. A hidden life, a silent battle. My mind flashed back, replaying snippets of the past 12 months. Sarah's increased stress, yes, I'd noticed. Her frequent late nights, too, dismissed as the demands of her ambitious career. a guardedness in her eyes sometimes, a distance I'd put down to exhaustion. I'd attributed it all to the natural pressures of her job, the relentless pace of a doctor's life. Now it twisted into something else, a betrayal of my trust, of our shared understanding. "Why didn't you tell me?" I managed, my voice tight, rough. "Why didn't you come to me, Sarah?" The words tasted of pain, sharp and metallic. She lifted her head, her face blotchy, tear-streaked. "Silas, he has immense power, Tom. You don't understand." Her voice was a fragile whisper. "He could destroy me, my reputation, my career, everything I've built." She tried to gesture, a weak movement of her hand. "The old boys club at Oak Haven General, it's real. Silas has an iron grip on the board, on every promotion, every decision that matters." I looked at her, truly looked, and saw the fear in her eyes, deep and genuine. But beneath it, another image flickered. The sharp, competent, professional woman I had admired, the one who navigated the ER with such calm authority. That image, too, felt tarnished, overlaid with something I couldn't quite name, a sense of compromise, of hidden shame. My chest felt hollow. I didn't say anything else. I couldn't. The words I wanted to say, the accusations, the pleas, stuck in my throat. I turned, my footsteps heavy, and walked to the guest room. The marital bed, just down the hall, suddenly felt like a foreign country, a place I couldn't enter. It stood as a stark symbol of the divide that had opened between us, a chasm. Days blurred into a strained routine, quiet meals eaten across the kitchen island, our eyes mostly fixed on our plates, avoidant glances in the hallway. Our shared space, once so full of comfortable noise, was now dense with unspoken grief, a heavy blanket that muffled everything. I went to work. I ran calls, my mind half present, half lost in the repeating loop of Silas's slurred words. "Trouble at home, Pete," I mumbled one afternoon, while we waited for our next dispatch, parked under the shade of a sycamore tree. Pete, my paramedic partner, a man who rarely pried, just grunted in response. "The kind you can't fix." He nodded, said nothing, and went back to cleaning out the ambulance, leaving the silence to settle between us, companionable in its own way. I started to look at Silas Thorne differently. The polished charm, the booming laugh, the easy smiles, they now seemed like a thin veneer. I remembered moments, the way his eyes would linger a beat too long, the almost imperceptible coolness beneath his practiced warmth. Little things I'd dismissed as just Silas being Silas now took on a sinister edge. Sarah tried to bridge the gap, a mug of hot coffee left on the guest room nightstand, small notes scribbled on sticky paper tucked into my lunch bag. "Thinking of you," or "Hope you have a good shift." I saw them, I read them, but the wall between us felt insurmountable, built brick by painful brick. My anger simmered, a low, steady flame, but underneath it, a deep, unsettling sadness had taken root, heavier and more persistent than any fury. It felt like mourning. Late into the night, after Sarah had gone to bed, I sat at my laptop in the dim light of the kitchen. I typed Silas Thorne, Oak Haven General into the search bar. I scrolled through page after page, glowing reviews, professional accolades, awards from medical societies, photographs of him smiling, shaking hands, looking distinguished. He was a pillar of the community, a respected physician, a man beyond reproach. There were no cracks in the perfect facade, nothing incriminating. Yet a seed of doubt had been planted, deep and insidious, not just about Silas's true character, but about the very institution Sarah served, the place we had both poured so much of ourselves into. The resentment, at first aimed solely at Silas, now began to spread, an insidious stain. It settled on Oak Haven General itself, on the polished floors and sterile walls, on the silent complicity that must have fostered a man like Silas Thorne. It was a cold anger, unlike the hot flash I'd felt at the Gala. This was a deeper, more unsettling fury aimed at the system. During my paramedic runs, shuttling patients in and out of the hospital, I started observing more closely. Not just the medical urgency, but the subtle power plays in the hallways, the hushed conversations, the way some doctors moved with a greater air of authority, while others seemed to shrink. The unspoken hierarchies were suddenly glaringly obvious. Sarah, sensing my withdrawal perhaps, or desperate for some measure of reconciliation, began to unravel more of the story. Slowly, painfully, the details of Silas's insidious manipulation emerged. He had, she explained, seen her ambition, her relentless drive, and cultivated it, offered mentorship, then twisted it into a weapon. "He had files, Tom," she whispered one evening, her voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. She was picking at a loose thread on the couch cushion, not looking at me. "He made threats about my past, about my family." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications, with secrets I didn't even know existed. A past I thought I knew, a family I thought was simple. My personal pain, the ache of betrayal, began to shift. It didn't disappear, but it morphed slowly into something else. A fierce, protective desire to expose Silas, to shield Sarah from the continuing shame. She was still my wife, still the woman who had captivated me 8 years ago in the ER, who had built a life with me. The next day, on shift, I found myself leaning against the ambulance, the aroma of diesel and stale coffee filling the air. "Pete," I said, keeping my voice low, "you ever hear anything odd about Silas Thorne? Any unusual incidents, complaints?" Pete, a man who saw everything but rarely commented, chewed on the end of his pen. His eyes, though, were sharp. He understood. He'd seen the shift in me, the quiet desperation. "Doc Thorne, he's untouchable, Tom, like a god around here." He paused, then added, "But I'll keep an ear to the ground. You know, just in case a loose brick falls out of that golden tower of his." A nod, that was all. But it was enough. I started digging. Not openly, not in any way that would draw attention. But my paramedic training had taught me to look for anomalies, for the things that didn't quite fit the narrative. I had access to some hospital data through shared systems, though not patient-specific. I began cross-referencing patient outcomes, focusing on cases where Silas was prominently involved, high-risk cardiac procedures, complex interventions. I looked for patterns, for anything that felt off. I remembered Mr. Schmidt, the man Sarah had saved. His effusive praise for her, so genuine. It stood in stark contrast to the murky reputation of some other, less ethical doctors in the system, whispered about in back rooms but never officially sanctioned. Sarah, in fragments, shared another piece of the puzzle. Silas's obsession with funding for a new cardiac wing, his ambitious pet project. He had talked about it at dinners, at hospital functions, with an almost evangelical fervor. "He wants that wing built," she'd said, "more than anything." I began connecting Silas's strategic friendships, the golf outings, the lavish dinners, with hospital board members to this very funding. The pieces were starting to slot together, forming a distorted image. And then I found it. A subtle, disturbing pattern. Certain high-cost medical devices, stents, pacemakers, specialized implants, seemed to be overprescribed or overused in cases under Silas's watch. Not outright malpractice, perhaps, but a subtle inflation, a nudge towards the more expensive option, always justified, always within the gray area of medical necessity. It was a financial thread, thinly veiled, tying his ambition to the very procedures he oversaw. The broken trust between us hadn't fully healed, not yet, but something new was emerging, a shared purpose. The quiet rage, the desperation, it was no longer just mine. It was ours, a joint, desperate quest for justice. "They're talking, Tom." Pete's voice was low, almost conspiratorial, as he handed me a thermos of coffee during a quiet moment in the ambulance bay. "Old Mrs. Henderson, 3 stents in 6 months, and old Mr. Peterson, pacemaker he probably didn't need." Whispers, always around Silas Thorne, pushing procedures on the elderly, the ones who won't question. My stomach clenched. This wasn't just about Sarah's humiliation anymore. This was about lives. Sarah and I, cautiously, hesitantly at first, began to pool our knowledge. The guest room, once a symbol of our divide, became our war room. The silence that had filled our home was now replaced with the low hum of Sarah's laptop and the rustle of papers. We felt like co-conspirators in a dangerous game, the stakes higher than we'd ever imagined. Sarah, using her newfound access as deputy head of cardiology, started cross-referencing specific patient files. Not full medical histories, but the procedural logs, the billing codes. She worked with a grim determination, her face pale in the glow of the screen. "Look at this, Tom," she'd say, her finger tracing a line on the monitor. "Mr. Davies, age 88, acute cardiac distress, admitted for an elective procedure, high cost." The pattern emerged, stark and undeniable. A shocking number of high-cost, often elective procedures approved by Silas, many of them ethically questionable, pushing the boundaries of medical necessity, and the thread connecting them was clear. These procedures often involve specific medical device companies, names that had suspiciously popped up in articles about various hospital board members' investment portfolios. "Misdiagnoses," Sarah murmured one night, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Or exaggerated prognoses, always just enough to justify the lucrative procedure." Her voice was filled with a chilling blend of disgust and disbelief. He was milking the system, Tom, risking lives for profit. A cold certainty settled in my gut. Silas's late-night consultations with Sarah weren't about a consensual affair. They were about blackmail, about covering his tracks. He had coerced her, threatened her, making her a pawn in his elaborate scheme. My own pain, the hurt of imagined infidelity, now seemed almost insignificant compared to the monstrous scale of his deception. We found more. Inflated invoices, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, or research grants routed through shell corporations. The new cardiac wing, Silas's ambitious pet project, wasn't just a vision for medical advancement. It was a major conduit, a grand facade for these illicit schemes, designed to generate more billable procedures and funnel more money into his pockets and those of his cronies. Sarah remembered the pressure, subtle at first, then more explicit. He'd tell me to prioritize efficiency with certain device brands, to consider the long-term benefits of specific, expensive procedures for patients who might have done just as well with less invasive, cheaper options. The dots connected, forming an ugly picture. I felt a cold, righteous rage. Silas hadn't just humiliated my wife. He had used her ambition, her vulnerability, and even the shadow of our relationship to cover his tracks, to give him an alibi while he preyed on the sick and the trusting. We created a detailed spreadsheet: names, dates, procedures, associated device companies, board members. Meticulously documented every instance of potential fraud, every compromised patient, every inflated charge. The scale of the deception was much larger, far more insidious than we had initially imagined. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was systemic. "This isn't just about us anymore," I said, my voice low but firm. The resolve had hardened within me. "This is about Oakhaven City. Life's choices often carry hidden costs, and sometimes the price paid is far more than expected. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold." The spreadsheet grew, a precise accounting of Silas's avarice. But even with the meticulous detail, Tom and I both knew it wasn't enough. We couldn't just walk into the hospital board meeting, present our findings, and expect justice, not against Silas, not against the entrenched system he had built. We needed an airtight, undeniable case, and we needed an ally, someone inside Oakhaven General who possessed a moral compass not yet corrupted by the institution's silent compromises. My mind kept returning to Linda Hansen, head of neurology, sharp, ethical. She had been one of the few at the gala who offered genuine congratulations, a small flicker of warmth in the cold, crowded room. It was a risk approaching her, but I had to. I caught her one afternoon in the physician's lounge, pretending to review charts. "Linda," I started, my voice lower than usual. "Can I talk to you? Privately?" She looked up, her expression calm, but her eyes held a flicker of curiosity. We walked to an unused consultation room, the door clicking shut behind us. I laid it all out, the bare bones of it, the suspicion, the evidence we'd gathered. Her initial wariness of Silas Thorne was evident, but as I spoke, I saw something else in her eyes. Recognition. She confessed she had harbored her own suspicions about Silas's ethics for years, seen the subtle push for unnecessary procedures, the unseemly coziness with certain device reps. "He's a shark, Sarah," she admitted, her voice tight, "but he's always been too clever." She agreed to help secretly, offering access to more departmental records, internal communications that might shed further light. Meanwhile, Tom leveraged his connections as a senior paramedic. He moved through the hospital with a different intent now, his questions discreet, probing. He talked to nurses he trusted, to technicians in the cath lab, the ones who saw the daily grind, the small abnormalities that piled up. He learned about a few nurses and administrative staff who had been quietly dismissed over the past year or two. Their departures had been brushed off as performance issues or restructuring, but now, in hindsight, they looked like something else. They had questioned Silas's orders, or his paperwork, or the need for certain procedures. Silenced. The stress mounted, a constant pressure on my chest. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every whispered conversation in the hallway felt aimed at me. Exposure, professional ruin, the loss of everything I'd built, my entire career. It was a heavy weight as Tom sensed it. One night after another long session poring over documents, he pulled me close. His arms were strong, familiar, grounding. "We're in this together, Sarah," he murmured, his voice firm against my hair. "No matter what they throw at us." His words were a lifeline anchoring me in the swirling storm. Together we compiled a comprehensive dossier. Patient testimonies, carefully anonymized. Financial records, showing the flow of money. Internal memos, hinting at pressure from Silas to meet targets for certain procedures. The evidence was damning, a thick binder of undeniable facts, clearly connecting Silas and several prominent board members to the fraudulent schemes. Now came the critical decision. How best to expose him? An internal investigation through the hospital's own channels, or going straight to external authorities? I advocated for an internal approach first. If we go public immediately, I argued, it'll destroy Oak Haven General's reputation. Years of work, down the drain. Maybe we can clean house from the inside. There was still a part of me, however small, that wanted to protect the institution I had dedicated my life to. Tom, more cynical, more pragmatic, pushed for external authorities. "They'll bury it, Sarah," he countered, his jaw set. "The board, they're all connected. They'll protect their own, protect their investments." A swift cover-up. He was right to be wary. His experience as a paramedic, seeing the raw edges of humanity, had left him with fewer illusions. This renewed collaboration, born of desperation and a shared quest for justice, slowly began to mend the deep cracks in our own fractured relationship. The guest room was no longer a symbol of our divide, but of our reluctant, growing solidarity. The polished conference room of Oak Haven General felt sterile, cold. Sarah, with Linda's quiet backing, laid out the dossier before three board members known for their integrity. The thick binder, heavy with evidence, rested on the gleaming mahogany. Their faces, at first polite, slowly shifted to visible shock as they absorbed the detailed accounting of Silas Thorne's fraud. They exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes darting between the damning documents and Sarah, then back again. Hesitancy hung in the air, thick and palpable. Silas was powerful, too powerful it seemed, even for undeniable truth. Silas, a man with ears everywhere, somehow caught wind of the brewing internal investigation. He didn't wait for formal accusations. He launched a vicious counteroffensive, a preemptive strike. Ugly rumors began to circulate through the hospital like a virus. Sarah, he claimed, was unstable, suffering from burnout. She was fabricating evidence out of a personal vendetta, fueled by professional jealousy over her recent promotion. His network, swift and ruthless, moved to discredit her before she could fully speak. I heard the whispers during my runs, saw the averted eyes. My fury was a cold, hard knot in my chest. He would stop at nothing. He would burn everything down, including Sarah's reputation, our lives, to protect himself. The internal route, we realized, was too dangerous. We were fighting a man who controlled the battlefield. "We go to the DA," I said, the words firm, leaving no room for debate. Sarah nodded, her face grim but resolute. It was a difficult decision, fraught with more risk, but it was the only path left. The Oak Haven City District Attorney's Office was, predictably, skeptical at first. Silas Thorne's influence was vast, his name synonymous with Oak Haven General's prominent standing in the community. He was a donor, a pillar. Dr. Jenkins, the DA, a man named Miller with tired eyes, said, "This is a very serious accusation against a very well-regarded man." Sarah, however, was unwavering. She provided detailed expert testimony, her medical knowledge impeccable, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She broke down the complex medical procedures, the ethical violations, the financial discrepancies. She laid bare the threats, the coercion, risking her medical license, her reputation, everything she had worked for since that day in the ER. I followed, delivering compelling narratives from a paramedic's perspective. I spoke of the patients Pete and I had transported, the elderly, the vulnerable, the ones who had undergone procedures that, in retrospect, seemed questionable. I highlighted the real-world harm, the suffering, the erosion of trust in the very institution meant to heal. Then, Linda Hansen courageously stepped forward. She corroborated Sarah's claims, providing internal documents she had quietly gathered, her own observations, the whispers she had heard. Her testimony, coming from a respected head of department, lent our case an invaluable weight. Cornered, his empire crumbling, Silas Thorne made a final desperate attempt. He reached out to Sarah through an intermediary for a private meeting. "Retract the accusations," he offered, his voice silk smooth, devoid of his usual bluster. "And I'll ensure your career is protected, even advanced. A seat on the board, perhaps, in time." It was a chilling offer, a last, contemptuous grasp for control. Sarah met his gaze, unflinching. "Your time is up, Silas," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "The truth has a way of coming out." The legal process began, slow and arduous, a grinding machine, but the truth, once buried beneath layers of power and corruption, was finally out in the open. Tom and Sarah, our relationship reforged in the fires of adversity, braced for the long fight ahead, our bonds stronger than ever. The announcement came on a Tuesday, delivered by District Attorney Miller himself. A full, wide-ranging investigation into Oak Haven General Hospital. The words, once spoken, felt both liberating and terrifying. The gears of justice had begun to turn. Silas Thorne was swiftly suspended from his duties, the public outcry too loud to ignore. Within a week, he resigned in disgrace, his golden reputation shattered. Multiple criminal charges followed, the details slowly trickling into the local news. The board members implicated in the fraud, those who had turned a blind eye or actively participated, were also removed from their positions, facing their own legal battles. The scandal rocked Oak Haven City, shaking public trust in its most respected medical institution to its very core. The murmurs at the grocery store, the hushed conversations in coffee shops, all centered on the shocking revelations. Sarah's career, despite her courage, was temporarily derailed. The glare of the spotlight was harsh. She faced intense scrutiny, whispers, and professional backlash from some quarters who couldn't or wouldn't separate her from the scandal. But I stood by her side, unwavering. I was her quiet strength, her steady presence through the storm, providing emotional and practical support. We cooked meals together, took long walks by the river, and talked, truly talked, about everything. The full medical fraud scheme was laid bare. Years of deep-seated corruption, of greed disguised as ambition, all woven into the very fabric of the hospital. Oak Haven General, reeling from the revelations, underwent a major overhaul. New ethical guidelines were implemented, new leadership appointed. It was a slow, painful process of healing for the institution and for the community. Sarah, though initially ostracized by some, slowly began to rebuild her reputation. Her integrity, once questioned, became undeniable through her steadfast commitment to ethical practice and patient care. She spent extra hours, volunteered for community clinics, quietly proving herself, one patient at a time. I found a new sense of purpose in my work as a paramedic, advocating for greater patient safety and transparency within the local emergency services. The experience had opened my eyes to the vulnerabilities in the system, and I wasn't going to let them close again. Our marriage, deeply scarred by the ordeal, but ultimately resilient, emerged stronger. The cracks had been deep, but the repair work, painstaking and honest, forged a new, unshakable foundation. We had faced the worst together. Eventually, we knew we needed a fresh start. The ghosts of Silas Thorne and the public humiliation at the Elmwood Inn Gala were too present in Oak Haven. We eventually left Oak Haven General, finding new roles in a different city, a smaller, more ethical clinic where patient care, not profit, was truly paramount. The memory of the Gala, Silas's cruel words, remained a permanent, painful scar, a constant reminder of what we had endured, the price we had paid. But we also realized that the price of justice, though agonizingly high, was worth paying for our truth, worth paying for our morality, worth paying for the chance to rebuild, honestly. Life in Oak Haven City from a distance began anew. Forever changed, it stood as a testament to the difficult, necessary act of facing hard truths and holding on to what truly matters. The investigation by the Oak Haven City DA's office laid bare the deep-seated corruption that had festered within Oak Haven General. Silas Thorne, once untouchable, faced criminal charges, his professional life ending in disgrace. Other powerful figures, long protected by their positions and wealth, were also held accountable. The scandal shook the city, forcing a reckoning with uncomfortable truths about power and ethics. Sarah and I navigated the aftermath together. Her career, though scarred, slowly healed as her integrity shone through the mud thrown at her. My own purpose deepened, advocating for patients in ways I hadn't imagined before. Our marriage, tested by betrayal and public humiliation, emerged not unscathed, but undeniably stronger, built on a foundation of hard-won honesty. We left Oak Haven, seeking a new start, but the memory of Silas's cruel words, the price of justice, remained a permanent scar. It was a high price, but one we both knew was worth paying for the truth.